What's up guys, today we're gonna go over the King's Gambit, which is one of the best openings you can play in Blitz with white. It starts off with you playing pawn e4, your opponent responds pawn e5, and after that, you start rocking with the move pawn to f4. Now, there are a couple of great advantages of the King's Gambit. It's very aggressive, it's full of traps, and your opponents usually know little to nothing about it. And that's why a lot of you guys wrote me that you have over 90% win rate with it, and this is crazy. Now, what's the main point of the King's Gambit? Well, apart from the fact that you're challenging black center, like your longer term plan is that you want to open up the f-file, where your rook will probably stand after a castle kingside, which allows you to create that quick attack against black's king. On top of that, you can easily bring your bishop out to c4 to reinforce this pressure, and that allows you to really create a devastating attack within a couple moves. Alright, so in most cases, your opponents will capture here on f4, although some of them will back down and play d6 just to defend their pawn. We'll cover both. Let's start with pawn takes f4. After that, you gotta watch over their only and main threat, queen to h4 check to your king. Since you moved your f-pawn and it's no longer on f2, this queen h4 at times can be unpleasant. But of course you can stop this very easily just by playing knight f3, which covers the square. And knight f3 is the move you're going to be playing here all the time on the next move, just to develop and to cover your king. Now in this position there are a couple main options for black. Again, we're going to cover them all. Let's start with the move pawn to d5, when they just try to challenge your center and open lines for their pieces to be developed. In this case, the main move is pawn takes d5, but we're going to play something a lot more interesting. Pawn takes d5 is certainly a fine move to play, but you can instead just defend your pawn with the knight from c3. In this case, you're also putting pressure here. Usually they capture on e4, you then recapture. And generally speaking, your plan in this position, as well as in other King's Gambit positions, is to move your d-pawn forward, which enables your bishop from c1 to later capture this pawn on f4. Thus, you'll regain material and have a more dominant position. But your opponent may very well insist on their idea to try to make use of this weakness along this diagonal. And if they want to somehow defeat you quickly, now this knight is what stops them from doing so. So they may play bishop g4, and the spin is something that they love a lot. And after that, you just play queen e2, pretending like you're just developing. Here they may notice that they can actually take here, attacking your queen, preparing for this queen h4 check on the next move. So far so good, but there is one little nuance here that they missed, and it is the fact that after knight to f6, you just checkmated black in one move. The next variation is one of my favorites, and you're gonna catch a lot of flares with this line. Now after f4, sometimes your opponents don't really know what to do, and that's why they don't want to get into complications, and they prefer to play safe by just going pawn to d6 and defending this pawn on e5. After that, just as always, you play knight f3. In this case, that also puts more pressure to the central pawn on e5, therefore they defend it by going knight to c6. And then you play bishop c4, and generally speaking, this is a great position for you to play, because if your opponent refuses to grab your pawn on f4, then now they don't have any material advantage, and you have your attack for free, which is nice. In this position, generally speaking, you want a castle, finish your development, and attack this f1 square. But very often they'll try to play bishop g4. Again, lots of amateur players really love to pin your knight down to the queen, and after you castle kingside, they may wish to try knight d4, because after the knight is pinned, it makes sense to put more pressure on it, trying to expose your king and to attack that way. But here is when there comes a really nasty surprise. Bishop takes f7. All of a sudden, you sacrifice your bishop. Your opponent takes it, and then you follow up with knight to g5 check. This is a fairly standard tactical motif, generally speaking, but in the current context, this is something quite unique, I would say. So knight g5 delivers check to the king, and if the king moves, you're willing to just get your bishop back on the next move, and the material will be equal, rather, you'll have an extra pawn, plus this opponent's king will be completely exposed, and you just have a winning game easily. But some of your opponents will just notice that, hey, actually this queen is under the attack, and so they'll think about it this foot line. What if I just take away this knight, and after that grab your queen? So they take here on g5, thinking that they outsmarted you, you recapture, and now they try to capture your queen, thinking that they'll be up a piece at the end of this line. But after that, computer starts showing them this red highlighted square, showing that this is an illegal move. They start figuring out, like, what the heck, and then they realize that their king is actually under the check. Because when you're captured here on the previous move, pawn takes g5, that did not only capture something, but that actually opened up this discover check. And so like realizes that, hey, they gotta move their king somewhere. After that, you calmly grab this bishop, and now you're up a queen and win the game easily. Now let's have a look at the main and the most challenging variation for white. Black needs to accept this gambit, and after you go knight f3, they can go g5, which is the most ambitious attempt of black. First of all, they protect this pawn on f4 so that you can never hope to play d4, in the future and get it back that way. That's the first reason, but the second reason is even more ambitious for black. They want to push this pawn forward, drive away this knight, and after that, bring their queen out to h4 and start attacking you immediately. And it's not that easy for white to figure out what to do here. Usually white goes d4 or something like that, but we have prepared another line which is completely unknown by your opponents and which sets a very interesting trap. So you go knight c3, pretending like you just developed. Okay, your opponent is happy. He wants to play g4, drive your knight away, and after you move, he plays queen h4, and he thinks that he is nearly winning the game, because he's a pawn up, plus he's attacking your king, and it doesn't look like there's an easy way out for you. Still, you play g3, and your opponent is again happy. He takes here, trying to completely break open your king. Then you capture this pawn on g4, and the correct thing for black to do here is just to trade queens and go into this approximately equal endgame. But of course, many of them will find the tactical motif pawn to g2, which looks like a really beautiful combo that they have found. g2 sacrifices the queen temporarily because of the discovered check, but on the next move they're going to get their queen back, plus win your rook on h1. And it looks like they found something truly smart, and they're winning the game. But the reality is completely opposite, because after queen h5, there is just no way for them to defend this pawn on f7, and although they're up a rook currently, you just checkmate them within the next couple of moves, and that's end of story. And it's a really evil trap, because even very advanced level opponents can easily be trapped like that. Seeing these whole variations, of course, nearly impossible. Now, what do they do now? I mean, they cannot just defend it with the knight, because if they try that, you just go d4, and on the next move you eliminate the knight, and there's nothing they can do to stop you from capturing this pawn on the next move. So that doesn't help. In one game, they tried to provide an escape square for their king, so they just played bishop e7, hoping that you're going to capture, and the king runs away here to d8, and they seem to be fine. So instead, white took here with the knight, pretending like they want to just get the rook back, but black played knight f6. Again, black is playing actually very good and creative chess. He's counter-attacking you, and now he thinks, hey, finally I got you. The queen has to move, after that I grab the knight, and I have half of the board of extra pieces. But here's when comes another surprise. You go knight to d6, and it turns out this is a discovered check, as well as a double check from the knight and the queen. Therefore, the king has to move. Now, where should it go? If it goes to f8, that's a very standard queen to f7 checkmate, kind of like the fool's checkmate. So instead they went king d8, probably thinking that, they still should win the game. But here comes queen to e8, the final blow that checkmates black on the next move with this knight on f7. Now, it's quite fun how white is basically completely undeveloped in the final position, and they deliver this checkmate with a single knight from f7. Of course, another question that you may have is, okay, Igor, I can beat an opponent easily if he knows nothing about the king's gambit, but what if he's well prepared? What if he studied opening theory? Well, there you go. In this case, he's quite likely to settle for the Fischer variation, suggested by Bob the Fischer. So this is when black goes pawn to d6 first, controlling the central squares, and they aim to go g5 next on the following moves, and build this kind of massive pawn chain which serves as a barrier for black to hold their position so that you can't approach them and attack them. In this case, what I recommend you to do is to play bishop c4, which deviates from the main line already, and it creates some problems for black. Now, generally speaking, the move bishop c4, of course, is very standard. We know that it's part of your plan. You want to castle, put the rook here, and attack them later, right, together with this bishop. But what can they do now? g5 right away does not seem to be really good, because in this case, you can actually undermine this pawn chain by playing pawn h4. And if they decide to split their pawns up, you're going to pick them up easily, and that's nice. But g4 is not good for black, because now with knight to g5, you start hitting black right away, and they're in trouble. So g5 doesn't work for black, and for that reason, they usually play h6 first, which seems like a super solid move. They want to prepare and then play g5 when it's just extremely solid and everything is overprotected. But you simply stop that by playing pawn h4 yourself so that they can't play g5. You control the square. Now, then they just start developing, usually knight f6, developing the knight, hitting this pawn, so you defend it. Then they usually go bishop g4, developing the bishop, beating your knight. So far, so good. You play d4, and that's one of your also very standard ideas. You want to develop your bishop and get your pawn back. And now they realize that they can actually defend this pawn. They can't do it with the pawn, because after a pawn takes, they can't recapture. That would hand the rook on h8, which is nice for you. But instead, they realize that they can actually go knight h5 and defend the pawn that way, and that looks pretty cool for black, because they still maintain their extra pawn, plus in the future, maybe this knight can jump to g3 and attack you that way. So black right now is super happy with their position, but if you're a part of the Igor nation, you know that something is coming, and that is indeed true. You go knight e5, and it's a rare case where you have the real-life opportunity to deliver legal checkmate against your opponent, but in a very unusual position where they completely don't think about it. So knight e5 sacrifices the queen here, obviously, and if they take it, bishop takes f7, and you just go after their king. King goes to e7, knight to d5, delivers this beautiful checkmate. And black could have not taken her queen, but they're losing anyway. And if they decide to take the queen, that's a beautiful finish. And finally, let's talk about a very natural move of black, which is actually a common error, which is knight to c6. Again, if your opponent is unfamiliar with the king's gambit, which is the case for 99% of your opponents, they're likely to play this move, because they need to develop, and they realize that if they develop this knight instead, you can play e5 and start attacking it right away, which feels uncomfortable. Therefore, they may try to play safer and go knight c6. In reality, it is wrong, because after that, you can go d4, and then you threaten to play d5 and kick this knight away, and it's kind of unpleasant for black. Besides that, you're still going to get your pawn back with bishop takes f4 on the next move. So knight c6 proves to be wrong for black. Nevertheless, they play it. Now, after d4, you threaten d5, kicking this knight off, so they often play d5 themselves, trying to stop your pawn from going there. But in this case, after they straight on d5, you can play knight c3 and gain an extra tempo to attack this queen. And you already have a nice position. So generally speaking, you want to get this pawn back, you want to finish your development, play bishop d3, castles, like all the usual stuff. But of course, right now, they gotta address the main threat, knight takes d5. And they'll usually, the most common move is queen e6, they want to gain a tempo to attack your king. Then you play bishop e2, and in this position, it may seem easy when you know it, but the truth is, in most cases, they just develop somehow. They go knight f6 or bishop b4, and any of the usual moves blunders the simple fork pawn to d5. Again, seems simple when you know it, but when you don't, it's easy to miss this. And after d5, you just grab the knight on the next move, or the queen, if they're generous enough, and you have all the advantages of your position, plus an extra piece, which should be enough to win.